Christmas dinner has always been my favorite ritual. The house glowed with soft golden lights, the tree dressed in ornaments collected across decades, each one holding a memory I thought would never betray me. The long table stretched from one end of the dining room to the other, covered in my best linen, heavy with platters of roasted turkey, glazed ham, buttery rolls, and bowls of cranberry sauce so red they gleamed like jewels. Laughter filled the air, glasses clinked, and for a few rare moments I felt as though the years of sacrifice had been worth it. This warmth was my reward. I leaned back, savoring the sight of my children and grandchildren all gathered together, their voices overlapping like music. For a fleeting second I let myself believe I was seen, appreciated, and central to the life of this family. Then my grandson's small voice cut through the noise. "Grandma," he said, his little hands holding up a folded sheet of paper he had plucked from the coffee table in the living room. "I found a letter. Can I read it?" Before I could answer, before anyone could stop him, he had already begun. His innocent voice, still high-pitched with childhood, filled the room with words that burned like acid. At first I thought I misheard, but the second line made my heart drop. The letter was not a note of holiday cheer. It was not a recipe tucked away or a card left behind. It was a collection of accusations, ugly twisted fragments of truth, stripped of context and dressed as betrayal. The room fell silent. Forks hovered mid-air. Even the candle flames seemed too still, as if the air itself was holding its breath. My daughter's eyes widened. My son-in-law frowned, and across the table, I caught the faintest curl of a smirk on my sister-in-law's lips. My grandson, too, innocent to understand the poison he was releasing, kept reading, his voice stumbling on words he didn't quite know how to pronounce. But the ones he did say landed like knives. She knew all along. She kept it hidden. Money that should have been shared. Secrets she never told. I could feel the blood rushing to my face, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. My hands resting on my lap trembled. "Not here. Not like this." Those words repeated in my head like a desperate prayer. I looked around the table. My eldest daughter's jaw clenched as she leaned back in her chair. My brother shook his head slowly, a performance of disappointment. One of the younger cousins whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. And all I could think was how carefully I had built this night, this home, this illusion of harmony, only to watch it collapse in a matter of seconds. The letter went on, each sentence more damning than the last, painting me as deceitful, greedy, manipulative, words I had never claimed for myself, twisted versions of actions I had taken out of necessity or love. But no one in that moment wanted to hear explanations. They only wanted the spectacle. I opened my mouth to stop him, to snatch the letter away, but my throat closed around the words. If I silenced him, would it look like guilt? If I let him continue, would the damage ever be undone? I froze, paralyzed between shame and fury, as my own flesh and blood unknowingly dismantled me in front of everyone I loved. The silence after he finished was worse than the reading itself. No one reached for food. No one met my eyes. The only sounds were the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the crackle of the fireplace. My grandson, oblivious, folded the letter and set it down beside his plate, his attention already shifting to the dessert he'd been promised. But the adults sat frozen, their gazes heavy and sharp, each one cutting deeper than the next. I felt naked, stripped of dignity in the very room I had poured my life into. The table I had prepared as a symbol of love now felt like a courtroom bench, and I was the accused. "Not here, not like this." The words echoed in me, though no one heard them. All they saw was a woman suddenly small, diminished, a shadow of herself at the head of the table, and across from me, that smirk remained. A silent signal that this was no accident, that someone had planned for this letter to surface tonight. I sat there, my pride scattered across the tablecloth like broken glass, realizing with a cold certainty that Christmas dinner would never be the same again. The china clinked after the letter, and my mind did what it always does when cornered. It ran backward through years of kitchens, through nights without end. If they could sit inside those nights, they might taste what love truly costs. The year the factory cut my hours and the heater coughed cold air, I took my wedding bangles to the pawnshop, thin as breath by then. I watched them slide across the counter. No one noticed, but the lights stayed on and the children never knew darkness. I skipped dinner so others could have seconds, saying I wasn't hungry until the lie fit my tongue. I made a feast from scraps, stale bread to stuffing, bruised apples to pies, one chicken stretched to feed 7. They praised my magic, while my stomach learned the patience of a locked door. When my mother-in-law's heart stuttered, I slept upright in a hospital chair. I bathed her with shaking hands, sang hymns in a whisper. Family came for photographs and left before the nighttime work began. I signed forms, argued with insurance, learned medications, Christmases, birthdays, graduations. I staged them all. I ironed tablecloths, taught grandchildren to string garlands, memorized who hates cilantro and who swears by extra salt. I kept a private ledger, candles, napkins, rides when parties ran late. Last-minute gifts so no one felt forgotten. I believed if I loved loudly enough, the echo would return instead. I became the house itself. Useful, always there, rarely thanked. She loves doing it, they said, as if gratitude were a tip jar I kept for myself. When decisions were made, move, the wedding venue, the sale of my husband's tools, they decided for me and called it kindness. We didn't want to burden you, they'd say, placing the burden at my feet. Small cuts piled up, jokes about my old-fashioned recipes, eye rolls when I asked for phones to be put away, ideas heard only when spoken by someone younger. I told myself I was the bridge between generations. I didn't notice how many feet walked on me. Money left my wallet like breath leaves lungs, necessarily, constantly, invisibly. I loaned without contracts because family shouldn't be counted in ink. Tuition gaps, deposits, bailouts. Some of it returned as thank you texts. Most of it vanished. You're an angel, they'd gush. Angels, if they exist, are exhausted women pretending they are fine. Sometimes, I caught a glint of something sharper under the sweetness. My sister-in-law offered compliments that turned to comparisons, kept tabs on who hosted more, who gave better gifts. She once accidentally read a message on my phone and repeated a private worry like community news. I called it curiosity. Last spring, I tucked a folder of bank statements behind the flour canister temporary, I thought, until taxes were done. A week later, the folder sat 2 inches left. Only I measure the kitchen in inches. I asked if anyone had been looking for something. She laughed too brightly. What would I want with flour? The lie smelled like burned toast. In June, the side door was latched from the inside when I returned from the pharmacy. I never latch it. I stood on the mat with a paper bag of pills and felt the house breathe around me, familiar, yet not mine. On the hall table, the mail was stacked with precision of someone proving a point. I told myself I was imagining it. That is the first betrayal, distrusting your own witness. You downplay, you excuse. She didn't mean it, you say, while the ground tilts 1/8 of an inch each day. And one afternoon you realize you are walking uphill in your own home. Tonight's letter did not appear out of thin air. Its words were the fingerprints of someone who has watched me closely, who knows the soft places and the debts. It braids truth with malice, lists money I lent as money I hoarded, confessions made at midnight as calculated sins. It was written by someone who mistook my silence for weakness and my giving for guilt. Rage rose in me, not loud, but steady. It counted every invisible hour, every unthanked plate, every bruise pressed beneath sleeves and smiles. It gathered, like a tide finally turning, and with it came a clarity I postponed for years. The humiliation at this table is not new. It is merely public. The pattern has lived here all along, wrapped around our jokes, baked into the pies. If they only knew the truth behind that letter. The silence stretched so long I could hear the fire popping in the grate, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room. My grandson had already turned back to his pudding. Oblivious to the wreckage his innocent voice had scattered across the table. But the adults, they weren't innocent at all. It started with my brother, his lips pressed thin. So, he said finally, voice heavy with accusation, was any of that untrue? His eyes gleamed, daring me to answer. Of course it was untrue. My daughter shot back before I could find my voice. You all know how much she's done for us. Half of you wouldn't be sitting here if not for her sacrifices. A cousin laughed sharply. Sacrifices. Or control. There's always a price with her. And just like that, the lines were drawn: accusers, defenders, and the vultures who preferred to sit back, watching the drama unfold like theater. My living room, my sanctuary, had become a battlefield. I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. Decades of silence don't break easily. I had swallowed so many insults, so many slights, that my tongue had learned to curl back in self-defense. But something inside me shifted. The humiliation from that letter fused with every old wound, and the weight of it demanded release. My voice came out trembling but clear. Who wrote it? I asked. The question cut through the bickering, and for a moment, no one moved. Who planted that letter where my grandson would find it? Who wanted this spectacle? Eyes darted, forks clattered against china. And then her voice, smooth, smug, like silk pulled too tight. Well, my sister-in-law said, folding her napkin with deliberate precision, someone had to say it. The truth needed to come out eventually. Truth. The word curled like smoke around the table. That wasn't truth. I snapped, louder than I intended. That was poison dressed as honesty. Twisted pieces cut from a larger whole. Do you want the whole story? Shall I give it to you? My uncle smirked, leaning back. Go ahead. We're listening. So I did. I told them about the pawned jewelry, the nights without dinner, the endless loans never repaid. I described the hospital vigils, the birthdays salvaged at the last minute, the traditions I carried when no one else lifted a hand. My voice grew steadier with each word, fury sharpening it into steel. And yet, I said, sweeping the table with my gaze, I was mocked, excluded, rolled over like a doormat in my own house. The letter calls me secretive. I was discreet. It calls me greedy. I was generous. It lists debts as if I hoarded them when in truth, I paid them so you wouldn't have to. A murmur rippled. Some averted their eyes. Others, those who had borrowed, those who remembered, looked stricken, but not her. My sister-in-law tilted her head, her smile ablaze. Funny how every story makes you the saint. Maybe the letter isn't far from the mark. Maybe it's just finally saying what we've all been thinking. Gaslighting, plain as day. My daughter slammed her hand on the table. Enough. You've been jealous of her for years. Don't pretend this is noble. The room erupted. Shouts, accusations, defenses. Years of buried resentment boiled over. Cousins blamed uncles, siblings accused siblings. And in the chaos, I stood taller, my humiliation burning away into something fiercer. I raised my hand and the noise faltered. You wanted a truth? My voice shook the air. Here it is. I have been silent too long. You took my silence as weakness, my giving as guilt. But you will not twist my sacrifices into shame. Not tonight. The letter sat crumpled by my grandson's plate, its words still sharp, but suddenly small against the roar of lived reality, and just as the shouting threatened to rise again, the front door opened. A familiar figure stepped in, my father's old lawyer, clutching a folder under his arm. Face grave as stone. The room froze, every eye turning toward him. Proof had arrived, and with it, the promise that this night was far from over. The lawyer set his folder down on the table, the weight of it heavier than any turkey or roast I had ever served. He cleared his throat, eyes sweeping across the room of faces now pale with expectation. I received a call last week, he said. Someone requested copies of financial records and personal correspondence. Concerned by the nature of the request, I reached out to confirm. Tonight, seeing the damage caused, I felt it necessary to come. My heart thudded. Here it was, the line between rumor and proof. He opened the folder and spread papers across the table. Loan receipts signed in my name. Notes of repayment plans from relatives who had conveniently forgotten. Medical statements with my signature as guarantor. And copies of letters, my own words twisted in the version that had been read aloud. Gasps broke the silence. My daughter grabbed one document, scanning it with wide eyes. She paid for your surgery, she hissed at her uncle, shoving the paper toward him. And you dared to act as though she owed you. Color rose in his cheeks. He muttered something about misunderstanding, but the evidence lay bare. The lawyer continued, his voice steady. The letter your grandson read tonight was compiled from fragments, selective, misleading, half-truths. A malicious attempt to reframe generosity as deceit. His eyes flicked, briefly, toward my sister, law. All eyes followed. Her smirk was gone, replaced with a stiff mask of denial. I only wanted the family to know the whole picture, she stammered. If she was hiding things, hiding. My voice cut her off. Firmer now, no tremor left. I wasn't hiding. I was protecting. Protecting children from shame, protecting elders from worry, protecting the very people who now point fingers. I gave, and when I asked for nothing, you called it secrecy. When I sacrificed, you called it control. Tell me, what would you have called it if you'd carried my burdens? The room fell still. No one answered. The lawyer tapped the folder shut. The truth is clear. The accusations were false. For the first time that evening, I breathed without weight, pressing on my chest. Vindication doesn't come with cheers. It comes with silence, the heavy, undeniable silence of shame settling on those who reveled in your humiliation. Some muttered apologies, half-formed and reluctant. My brother shifted in his seat, mumbling, we didn't know. My cousin lowered her eyes. Even the vultures, those who had fed on spectacle, suddenly found their plates more interesting than my face. But I wasn't waiting for their apologies. For the first time, I didn't need them. I stood, my palms pressed against the table I had set with such care. Listen to me, I said, my voice stronger than I ever remembered it. I will not beg for your respect. I will not plead for understanding. I have earned both 100 times over. You mistook silence for weakness. You mistook sacrifice for shame. But hear me now, you will not twist my story again. I will speak it myself, whole and unbroken. Their eyes stayed fixed on me, some with guilt, some with awe. For once, no one interrupted. I turned toward the tree, its lights still twinkling, a reminder of why I had endured so long. Not for them, not anymore, but for the legacy of love. The lessons I wanted my grandchildren to carry. What I carry forward, I said softly, is not your betrayal. It is my strength. That's what I leave behind, not money, not secrets, but the proof that a woman can be brought low and still rise taller than all who tried to diminish her. Lump rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down. This ending would not be tears. It would be fire. I looked to the audience beyond my family, the listeners, the ones who know too well the sting of betrayal. Never let others write your story in secret, I said. Claim your voice before they do. Otherwise, they will twist it to shame you. And shame, once spoken aloud, can only be erased by truth. I straightened, feeling the years of silence fall away like a cloak I no longer needed, so I ask, yes, you listening now, if a family member exposed your private letter at the dinner table, what would you do? And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful family dramas that reveal the hidden battles behind closed doors.